Well, let's put the British Council in the context of what's happening in the world. It's extraordinary in a way. There's a contradiction in that the world has never been more connected. Global capital flows, financial flows, goods flows, global media, huge spread of the use of English, all facilitated, of course, by technology. And yet it's quite fragile. Each of those has fractures in it. And I think one of the great challenges in the world is to build trust. And that's what the British Council is about. Now, we do that through our strengths of English and education, society and the arts. But the challenge is to scale. I often come away from a country, I've been in 14 different countries this year, and I come away really impressed by what we're doing on the ground. But I'd like to do more. Not just a few percent more, but 10 times more. And that can only be done through partnerships, because that extends our reach, extends our capabilities, extends our networks, and by harnessing the great power of digital communications, rethinking what we do to take account of the internet age. I would say those are two of the biggest things facing us around the world. Well, obviously, one of the great things going for Britain and for the British Council is the growth of English. Various estimates, some say about 1.5 billion people are learning English at the moment, probably about 2 billion people want to learn English. How do you take account of that? Not just in direct English teaching, which is hundreds of thousands, but in working within the education systems of major countries, India, Colombia, Mexico. And one of the challenges there is, what is the economic model for that? Working with universities around the world, increasingly they want people who speak good English. What is good English? Well, we do a lot of testing, but they also require remedial testing, often a whole foundation course. Again, what's the right economic model of that? And I think in order to create the value of that, or take another example, it's important to develop sustainable arts ecosystems, if you like, in countries, if you think arts are important. But what's the value proposition and who pays for it? So we, I think, are on a journey to become much more an entrepreneurial public service than a grant-using service. And that's quite a different sort of organization, and that's quite a journey to be on. Well, there's a whole debate about the level of subsidy in the UK, as there is around the world. There are very different models for the arts around the world, but let's not concentrate on the UK, because our field is using what we have in the UK, which is a very vibrant and creative cultural industries and creative industries, using that around the world and trying to find models to sustain it. Now, some of those models can have private investment. We've just done a huge celebration, if you like, of UK arts in China, over 200 events in 26 cities. That was mostly funded by corporate sponsorships, big companies, Diageo, HSBC, etc. And they do it for brand purposes, for entertainment purposes, etc. But we also need to get money from government and major grant-giving foundations, etc., to do something much more of a grassroots to develop those ecosystems. And I think that the arts generally, I gave a speech on this on Monday, need to articulate better the role that the arts have in a country of enabling expression, enabling different points of view to be expressed, bridging different communities. And there is a real value there, there's a real social contribution. The role of the arts in schools, I think we underestimate. And I think we have to learn how to evaluate that better and find ways that will then pay for that value. Well, I mean, there's huge competition. I mean, there's competition in lots of senses. One is how to attract students in this fee-based economy, but also there's a role for overseas students. And UK education earns about £14 billion a year for the UK in the whole across education sectors. And in higher education, I see an increasing mobility. I'd like to see more UK students go abroad, but I think there'll be increasing competition for the best students from whenever. There's increasing competition, I think, in research and links with university around research and how they're to be paid for. I think most of the areas in which we work in are already quite complicated from a competition point of view, because it is a mixture of public, private, enterprise, etc. And that complexity is not going to lessen, it will in fact get more so. Well, of course, a lot of them are not very different from a private organisation. And what's fascinating, having spent most of my life in the private industry, in a people-based business, Accenture, much bigger, but actually not quite as complicated as the British Council, and more countries, twice as many countries the British Council has. And we've got 7,000 people in 110 countries. And so one of the parts of the journey we've been on for the last few years is something which at Accenture we were on probably 15, 20 years ago, which is how do you become more transnational, more multipolar, being very efficient at rolling out things, but not just for centre and everybody else. And I think when I arrived, I found they were going through a phase of quite complicated organisation, which I was very familiar with, because I did the same when I was running Europe, Middle East, Africa and India 15 years ago. And so I think the task you have to do is to try and make an effective, efficient organisation, but also, of course, there's a task of leadership. The task of leadership perhaps is more important. That is, how do you set the strategy, bringing people with you, and then you work with a board too, and we have a board, and I'm chair of that. How do you motivate the people? How do you get them to follow that same North Star, if you like? How do you get them to change? How do you get them to increase the pace? And I don't think the methods in a public service organisation are any different from what in a private sector organisation are. It's just a bit more complicated because you haven't got the same quite simple profit share motive perhaps that you do in some private sector organisations. Well, I'm not sure at the top, I'm not sure they're more complex, because the leadership of a major public company is very complicated, because you've got the whole set of other stakeholders like shareholders and investment analysts, etc. So it's a different set of stakeholders, and I'm not sure that I'd claim it was more complex, but it's certainly complicated because in the case of the British Council, for example, we have it is now down to about 20% of our revenues are government grant. So there's a whole set of discussions with the government stakeholders, the Foreign Office in particular, but also aligning what we do with our public purpose. But actually, 80% of our revenue is earned, and we want to be able to earn that in a way that's aligned with our objectives, but nonetheless free and entrepreneurial to get revenues where we can. And that means that, and of course, a lot of the work we do is also with international partnerships. So we have a lot of international stakeholders in what we do, as well as UK stakeholders. And that is quite a complicated set of things to manage. But I'm not sure I claim that it was more complicated than the set of stakeholders, say, the Chief Executive of Diageo has to deal with.
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's a big question. I wouldn't claim myself to be an expert on that. I am a believer in enterprise. I mean, I think let's say that straight away. I mean, I work at the moment in what they call a public enterprise, but I think enterprise generation, including, and most importantly perhaps, the vibrant small and medium-sized sector. And there's lots of factors around that, availability of capital being one. But I think we need more innovation. I think my own, this has got nothing to do with British Council, but my own feeling is that in some industries we're just not investing enough in the future. It's been observed, and I see some improvement in this, that we haven't invested enough at school level in science and technology. We're not producing enough engineers, not enough scientists, not enough mathematicians. I think there are a number of moves to address that, and I think that's important. But I think we should celebrate enterprise, but I think there's been also at the same time a major public trust because they see, for example, the salaries of chief executives increasing at multiple rates of what the salary increases for the rest of the population. I think that's one of the factors which actually causes a distrust of business, which I think is unhealthy. Well, I'm not sure I like the term corporate social responsibility. I do like the fact that companies should feel a responsibility to the communities around them, but not in a mandatory sense. I think it makes sense, in a mutuality point of view, to engage. After all, you are affected by the community around you in any country, and the way you behave will be observed. And in fact, lots of surveys show that customers are taking increasing notice of the way that companies behave. So there's an obvious self-interest in behaving responsibly, but also to engage in ways which are useful. At Accenture, we have what we call corporate citizenship, which actually I managed on a global basis, or inculcated on a global basis. And the essence of that was to use skills which people had. And the rationale for it in business terms was that nurturing certain intangible assets is very important. Take a couple. I mean, there's all sorts of things. Reputation in the community is one, knowledge of the world around you, but two very important ones to us is pride and morale of our people, and reputation in the recruiting marketplace. And it was pretty easily demonstrated that doing the right things, having the right projects which people engage with, improved those intangible assets very considerably. So for example, certainly as it was the case, probably still is, half the recruiting brochure for Accenture is about activities in corporate citizenship. Well, I developed a set of things when I was thinking. I received an honorary doctorate, and I was asked to say, what advice can you say? And I thought, well, I don't know, what advice can I say to people much younger than me? And I'm not sure if this is specific to entrepreneurs. It's a quite general applicability. Yeah, but I think that I've sort of tested it, and I've used it once or twice, and people say, well, that's probably true. And it applies to myself. I hesitate, but it'll be a general prescription. But what I sort of thought was the following: that you should pursue three things that appear to be contradictory, but aren't totally. One is really focus on what it is you want to do and do it well. Excellence, persistence, determination at the task or the job you've got. But the second thing, which is the first paradox, if you like, is that don't be too narrow. Be broad in your interests. It could be engaging in social work, it could be sport, it could be a number of things, but try and broaden your out so it's not, you do some things in addition to doing a very good job in your narrow job. And you'll find if you do that you'll have knowledge of and capability to respond to opportunities. And when the time is right, be opportunistic. So it's a curious sort of mixture of focus, but also being opportunistic and broad. But actually, once you'll find some opportunities, and then you can respond to them. So, my career, although it's been mostly in the private sector, then I got involved in arts, and one thing led to another, and then out of the blue came the opportunity to be chair of the British Council, which, by the way, is the most interesting and in some ways the most satisfying job I've ever done. But that came because of the mixture of things I'd done. And then when that opportunity came and said, well, that strikes a bell, I will go for it. So then you've got to apply your focus mode again and responding to opportunity and making sure you get it.